Thank you for coming back, and we're ready now for our keynote speaker, Dr. Michelle B. Larson. Dr. Larson is the 19th president of Clarkson University, serving in the role since 2025. Prior to Clarkson University, for 12 years, Michelle was the president and CEO of the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. Earlier in her career, while at the Center for Gravitational Wave Physics at Penn State, she was a member of the Central Pennsylvania Observers in State College as well. She earned her bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in physics from Montana State University. A physicist and amateur astronomer, Michelle has made her life's work to stimulate the thrill into others of chasing new cosmological understandings. The title of her talk today is Eyes to the Skies, My Journey as an Accidental Astronomer. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Larson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here. Shane and I were both members of the CPO when we were in State College, as was mentioned, and we had not yet been to this star party. So thanks for the invitation. We're delighted to be here and excited to talk to you. So as was mentioned, I was the president and CEO of the Adler Planetarium in Chicago for the last 12 years. Anyone here been to the Adler Planetarium? I knew Michael. Oh, good. Nice to see that. That's great. And we were hoping I could come up and speak to you while I was still in that role, such an aligned astronomy role. And then life happened in a really exciting way for us. And so just 5 months ago, we moved to Potsdam, New York. And now I'm the president of Clarkson University, as was also mentioned. But I still wanted to come give the talk, so I'm grateful for the invitation. And so what I did is I put together this great arc of how astronomy has been so instrumental in the pivots in my career. So we're going to take a career arc talk through the lens of astronomy, which for me very much was accidental exposure at different points. So I hope we find that interesting. Here you see a picture of the Table Mountain Star Party in Washington State. Anyone been to Table Mountain Star Party in Washington State? Shane and I. And so a fun star party with an interesting history. It actually used to be on Table Mountain in Washington, as you might expect. And then they were displaced due to fire. And so for over a decade, it was in Eden Valley, Washington, still called the Table Mountain Star Party. And they've just moved again, and they've changed the name this time. So it's called the Washington State Star Party. So that's where we've spent a lot of our time as amateur astronomers in environments just like this, enjoying the night sky. Here you see a picture of my very first telescope, and you might say, well, that's a very beautiful and quite large for your very first telescope, and the reason for that is because Shane builds telescopes. And so when you have someone in the house that builds telescopes, you get really great ones whenever you want, and we have a lot of them. So lots of options at our house because he enjoys the woodworking. So let's get started. Thought we'd start from early astro awareness, because I told you I'm an accidental astronomer, and that means that I did not have a lot of exposure to astronomy early in my life. It actually came later. But maybe there were some hints. So this was my very favorite plush toy when I was a baby. It actually lived with us for 50 years before it finally disintegrated. But you know, it's Leo, I heard someone say, and I actually called him Leo, so he was called Leo, so maybe that was a hint that astronomy was going to be part of me. This is me in an STP oil can something or other. I don't know why my parents had this, but I worked for NASA long enough to know that acronyms are important. So maybe this was my first exposure to knowing I might work for an acronym agency. And then lastly, this was our cat that we had adopted when I was a child, and I named the cat Nothing. And so if any of you were at Shane's talk earlier, you know, maybe this was my first foray into cosmology, which is nothing. There's nothing out there. So I think I had pretty good roots. I just didn't know it. It was just all too early. But let's talk about when it first began. So the road to my first astronomy awareness was that in 1981, my military father, so I grew up on Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. Some of you may have been there or know it. And so we were at Hanscom, and when I was about 10 years old, my father got stationed in Anchorage, Alaska. And so we opted to drive to Anchorage, Alaska in what was an orange Volkswagen bus, and this was the front page of the paper in our hometown. I was from Fitchburg. And so it was a real big phenomenon that a family of 4 plus a bird named Woodstock were going to make this trip to Anchorage, Alaska. And if you notice, the title of the newspaper article was Following the North Star. So there's another hint that astronomy was creeping in to my life. This is the route we took. So if you look at, Google didn't exist then, by the way. We had a giant, thick book called the Milepost, and that's how we got there. But Google thought it might take 76 hours, if you didn't sleep, to drive straight from Boston to Anchorage. But as I mentioned, my venturesome family took a month, and so we really meandered along the way, and we camped every single night of that month except 4 nights during the time. So it was really a wonderful, wonderful trip. I remember it quite fondly. There was no astronomy along the trip, though, because it was not something that was on my family's radar. It was not something we did or talked about. And I'll say a little more about that in a minute. When we did get to Alaska, does anyone recognize what this is? Alaska state flag, right? Anyone here been to Alaska, from Alaska? Yeah, lots of them. Great. Adventuresome people, us all. So this is the Alaska state flag, and again, perhaps another hint at the fact that astronomy was going to play a big part in my life. So that's probably the first constellation I ever saw. From my memory, that's the first constellation I ever saw was on the flag. Not in the sky, but on the flag, and probably when I remember learning about constellations. This is where astronomy really came into play, and I know Michael was just telling me he was on the NPR radio station while I was living in Alaska. He was there 1980 to 93, and I was there 81 to 89 as a child. So funny, because the radio announcers were the ones that told us, as the public, to go outside and see the Northern Lights. So the Northern Lights were very much a big part of growing up during the years that I lived there. My family still lives in Alaska, just to be clear, but I went to college in '89, and so that's why I moved away. But the aurora were almost familiar, because they happen so often up there, because it's so far north and it's dark all winter. So you could go out after dinner in the winter and see the aurora, because it was dark all the time. During the winter time. So I really appreciated seeing the aurora. I also saw the aurora from an airplane flying back from a volleyball competition that had been in Fairbanks, Alaska, and we were flying back to Anchorage, and the pilot let us all know that the aurora were outside the window of the airplane, and so that was really cool. So while we think of that now, most of us, I think, because of really great space weather communication, we know this is an astronomical event. But when I was observing the aurora as a child, we did not. We did not realize that this was due to something that was happening out in space. And so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So let's talk about when I did start to gain awareness that these things were happening out in space. And so that really happened when I was 20 years old, in my 20s. And many are surprised that I didn't really have an appreciation for astronomy until I was in my 20s. But just as many others are relieved, because lots of people do come into astronomy later in their life. And so I share this story openly with people who feel like apologetic that they came to astronomy later on. I think we can be introduced to astronomy at any point and still make it a really big part of our lives. And so what was going on with me is that I love the outdoors, and so I was in college and was invited to come to a star party. I didn't know what a star party was, but I heard it was outdoors and that you could camp in a tent and that during the daytime you could hike and swim and do things. And so I said, sure, I'm game. And so at this star party, I put out a nice blanket on the ground, and I laid down on the blanket and looked up underneath the pitch black dark sky, and I was happy as could be. I just was bathing in the night dark sky. And at that point, someone slipped me a pair of binoculars, and I started looking at the sky with the binoculars. Shane was that person who shared the binoculars with me. And so I think there was a piece of the moon that was setting. I can't remember the details of where it was because it wasn't up all night because it was a good star party. But I looked at the moon and I saw craters on the moon for the first time. And that was another piece I had no idea about. I did not know. Now, for those who may not know, this was all pre-internet. I'm old enough that this was all pre-internet. So it's kind of hard today to not know there's craters on the moon. But when I was growing up, I had not seen this kind of an image of the moon. And so that really, really was stunning to me that through these binoculars, I could see this detail. And I remember asking myself, has that always been there? It sounds like a silly question, but the fact that the moon looked like a flat white and gray surface to you most of your life, and then suddenly it pops out in 3 dimensions, I was wondering, if I'm missing that, if I didn't know that was always there, what else am I missing? So this is Shane and I looking in the mirror of his telescope, and I'd say this is kind of when my journey began, in the park when we were observing the moon through binoculars and then star parties to come. So the next thing after that binocular experience was Shane invited me to look through a telescope. I didn't have one yet, but he did. So he said, come take a look through the telescope. And that was my Saturn moment. The first time I saw that small little star that I could see off on the horizon, when we put binoculars on it, seemed a little squished. And when we put a telescope on it, had ears, as Galileo said, right? Galileo said Saturn was the planet with ears. And so that just fueled my curiosity about, if I didn't realize the moon had craters, now I didn't realize that I could see an actual planet with my own eye through binoculars and a telescope. I just immediately woke up to the curiosity of what must be out there. And then the next step was really just great timing. I was an undergraduate at Montana State University, and Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet hit Jupiter. Jupiter is one of my favorite planets because when I looked at it for the first time through the telescope, I just loved the fact that you could see weather in the atmosphere. You could see the swirl of the great red spot. You could see turbulent motion of the fluids of the atmosphere, the gas fluids of the atmosphere. So I liked the color and the movement of Jupiter. And right when I was thinking I had fallen in love with as much of Jupiter as I could fall in love with, this comet goes splashing into it. And so you could see all of the, I think I have another image. Nope, I don't. So you could see all of the brown spots of Shoemaker-Levy 9 hitting Jupiter, and that was during an astronomy laboratory class that I was taking as an undergraduate. So that just, again, kept fueling my curiosity about how much else is happening in the universe that I don't know about. Was there a question back here? Or were you just stretching? Okay, I thought I saw a question. Might have been a fly. All right, so all of this was this rapid rolling interest in astronomy that happened really when I went to college and started having exposure to others that knew about astronomy and took the time to share it with me. And that included Shane to begin with, and then we were members for a long time of the Southwest Montana Astronomical Society. So we have had the hard work of running star parties like this. So thank you to everyone who's running this star party, because we know how hard work that is, but to people like me, so important that we do things like this, that we gather around our telescopes and share that with others, because it was just really, really a pivotal time. So then I became an astronomer myself. I asked for a telescope. In the first picture, my requirements for a telescope, we were grad students at this time, and we lived on the second story of an apartment building in Bozeman, Montana. So I said to Shane, I want to be able to carry it myself, and I want to be able to carry it outside in one trip. If you knew me, you'd know I don't like carrying things. So I was like, I don't want to make all these trips to get the telescope set up. So he built me that beautiful telescope, and I had a handle on the mount, and I had a handle on the tube, and I could just head outside with the two of them. So it's a 6-inch telescope. I still have a 6-inch telescope. I still want to be able to carry it myself, and it's plenty big for me. And then you might be asking about eyepieces, but Shane always carries all the eyepieces because he's got a lot of them. So once I had my own telescope, I started doing the deep sky observing and the joy. So I don't know if many of you were actually at the earlier talk, but we're both observational astronomers, no computer, no tracking, home-built telescopes, and a really good star map, right? So we're star hopping and hunt and peck. Those were the two things I was trying to mix together. So we're star hoppers and hunt and peckers, and just really enjoy looking at the star map, looking at the sky, figuring out where to find what we're looking for. And so I'd say most of the 90s for me were that kind of joy of realizing that I could look at a star field up in the sky and I could figure out with a good map how to find things in it. So during that time, one of my very favorite things that I found, and it's still my favorite today, and last night when we were here observing, I was lying on a blanket looking up at the stars, and Shane found this guy and told me to come on up and see him because he's my favorite. So in Cassiopeia, can you see Cassiopeia here? In the constellation Cassiopeia, down here off the bottom, there's an open cluster called the Owl cluster. I hear people are getting excited. And also known as, right there is where it is, ET, the ET cluster. Can you see ET? Can you see two bright eyes that are really bright and then follow them down to the right at a diagonal? You see like a body, and then you see a little feet at the bottom, and then do you see his pointing up at the sky with his arm? Are you lying to me, or do you see it? All right, I saw a thumbs up. All right, this is ET. He's one of my favorite things to show the public when we're in a dark sky location and we're teaching them about the practice of hunting something down in the sky and then practice of looking at something like an open star cluster and seeing the form in it. And the reason I love doing that with ET is because you know when someone doesn't see it because they're quiet. They're like, yep, sure, lady, you're crazy, right? And then you say, all right, let's try again. Two bright eyes, comes down to the left, there's an arm, and then they'll go, oh my gosh, I see it. And then you know that they really see it. So fun one to help people gain that discipline of sticking with it through the eyepiece before they see it. Yeah?
There's 14 other common names for NGC 457, a total of 16.
I did not know that. So the comment that was just made is there are 14 other common names besides the two I mentioned for NGC 457, which is the official name, and I did not know that. 16 total names. Well, ET's my favorite.
Nazgul cluster, Johnny.
Oh, he's going on. Oh, Johnny Five Alive. I learned the Johnny Five Alive name when I was doing this to another college class later on because they didn't really know who E.T. was, but they knew Johnny Five, and you just keep making it more modern. So really enjoyed that in just a span of a couple decades, I went from not really knowing astronomy was a thing to being a star-hopping deep sky observer myself. So that was a pretty fun journey there. But let's keep going. Oh, here, I knew I had a picture. So I think I was supposed to tell you I fell in love with Jupiter back then, and now I'm supposed to tell you that it just got better, because here's what the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet looked like as it was falling into Jupiter and leaving those really black spots of debris, because we know comets are just debris, ice and dirt and dust, and so that was all evaporating in Jupiter's atmosphere, and that was super fun for me. The other thing that happened when I was in those same years was that someone had mentioned that if you have a long paper tube, like a wrapping paper tube, that if you put it up to your eye and you can really isolate the light from your eye, you can see Venus during the daytime. And I didn't believe that. I was like, there's no way you can see Venus during the daytime without a telescope. And so I still remember vividly all of us standing out back of the physics building, the old physics building at Montana State, A.J.M. Johnson, and we had wrapping paper tubes on our eyes, and we're all like this, and people were wondering what was going on. But we saw Venus. I can remember seeing Venus through that tube. And then, of course, that was when I also learned that Venus has phases, because it has the same motion around the sun that our moon does around us, and so you can see phases on Venus. And that was the next thing I learned. Astronomy just kept on giving when I was looking into it. And then to bring it full circle, this was the end of my undergraduate career, and it was time to decide what I wanted to do next. And it's a whole nother talk, but I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was 4 different majors while I was an undergraduate student, and I landed in physics because the physics faculty promised me it would keep all doors open, that you learned enough things in physics that you could figure it out later and you'd still have skills. So I bought into that, and then I had a bachelor's degree in physics, and I said, now what? I don't know what I want to do. And so they asked me to apply for a national scholarship to stay in physics, because I would keep getting skills until I figured it out. And I got that scholarship, and so I found myself in grad school. And I stayed at Montana State because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Might as well stay where I am and love. And I had to do a presentation to get into grad school. And so I had to research a topic that was known. This is not your original research. This is to show that you can research a topic that is known and do a technical presentation of it. And so I chose the space weather event that gives us the aurora, because I had remembered then that my first exposure to something astronomical was seeing the northern lights in Alaska. And I, at that time, had not researched what caused them. So I thought, I want to figure that out. So I did my technical presentation at the beginning of my master's degree on the sun, which has explosions that spew out high energy particles. And those high energy particles go all the way through space till they hit our atmosphere on the Earth. And when they hit our atmosphere on the Earth, they energize all of the atoms in our atmosphere. And the energized atoms are what give us that light. And it's the different kinds of atoms, carbon or oxygen or others, depending on the colors. What light comes out of them is what gives us the colors. So I did an hour-long presentation with a lot more equations than that, but it was really exciting for me to really process finally what had I been looking at in my childhood and how does that happen in the universe. And so that was a real bring it all together event for me. And I got into grad school. Just to end that story, I got a master's degree in physics, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And so I stayed, and about 2 years into my PhD, I finally figured it out. So they were right, it worked. Getting the physics degree finally paid off. So let's talk about when that moment happened, when I figured out what my calling was and why astronomy ended up also being a part of that. So in 1995 is when I went into my master's degree, and I did the presentation. And then soon thereafter, master's degrees are short, as I was entering into my PhD, the internet went public. And so in 94, 95 is when the public really started getting access to the internet. And NASA contacted the group I was with. And NASA said, this internet, we think it's going to be big. And we think we could really use it to help the public understand what, at NASA, we're seeing out there in the universe. Think about before the internet. You probably didn't know that the sun rotated. You might not have known that the sun exploded. You might not have known there were high energy particles that spewed out of the sun and came to the Earth and caused the aurora, because our information came more statically in newspapers, in encyclopedia, in textbooks. So we hadn't seen this kind of dynamic nature of the sun. And so that happened at our wedding too, by the way. We were getting married in a park and the motorcycles went through, so that feels familiar. So NASA had this really great idea, which was if we could use this internet to really bring the things that NASA's studying in the universe to the public, to the taxpayer that's supporting this discovery science, then we could really help advance all of our understanding of the universe we live in. So the project I got asked to help with was a solar physics project. Probably they thought of me partly because of that presentation I told you I gave to get into grad school. So we were asked to work on a satellite called the Yoko satellite. And the Yoko satellite was a Japanese satellite that had a US telescope on board. And the US NASA Lockheed telescope was to take images of the sun in X-rays. They were trying to study what the sun looked like in X-rays as well as in the visible light that we usually see. And so that was where I was asked, can you help us put what this satellite's going to see on the internet for others? Sounds like a daunting task because none of us had ever seen images of the sun in motion. So I thought I'd start simple and say, maybe some people in the public are like me. Maybe they don't know the connection to common everyday things and the universe. I didn't up until this point. So I thought I would start by just increasing all of our awareness of the fact that the sun is in the sky, which we probably all knew, but that it moves through the sky, that there's an arc of the sun through the sky, and then that means something in terms of the universe and the way things are moving. So the very first project I put together, because the satellite hadn't launched yet, so we needed images still, was helping people draw shadow plots, helping people put a stick into something that would hold it vertical, and then just let the sun go around the stick during the day and mark it off as that shadow from the stick went on the paper. And then through the lesson that I created, you can use that to find due north, because we all know that the sun rotates around the southern sky, and so you can triangulate and find due north. So this was really well received because there was the internet. People would email me and say, wow, I never thought about tracking the sun through the sky, never thought about what it meant in terms of its motion. So started there, and then that led to building sundials with people. Because of course, if you can understand the directions the suns are moving, you can do the math and the work to build a sundial. So we had a whole lesson on this website to build sundials. We built them out of little wooden checkers, nailing the nails in, bending the nail over to the latitude at which you were going to use it. All of this is related to why sundials work. And then that led to an engineering firm contacting me, and that engineering firm was in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. So I thought this would be fun to talk about here in Pennsylvania. And so Paul Kirby, who was an engineer from Keller Engineers, this was back in 1994. So if anyone knows Paul or Keller Engineers, you should say so. They contacted me based on the lesson that was on this website to make shadow plots and build sundials. And they said, we want to do this at scale. In this new public park in Hollidaysburg, we want people to understand the motion of the sun through the sky, how we tell time with sundials. And so Shane and I made a trip to Hollidaysburg after the sundial was put up. I think it should still be there. It's a beautiful, amazing, the flowers are bigger now. But the thing that I'm most proud of is that we had written up a very detailed equation of time calculation, because sundials are not perfect. Because we have made all kinds of adjustments in our modern living for time zones, for daylight savings time, for all kinds of artificial things that are not astronomical that we put in place to allow us to live our lives more conveniently. And so if you want to use a sundial to understand the time, you have to back all that out. And so I had written for this NASA website a clear description of how you could back all that out, and they wanted to use that too. So there's a beautiful plaque at the Hollidaysburg Park where this sundial is that explains how to get from sundial time to clock time. And I was very proud of Keller Engineers and very proud of NASA for thinking the public's going to be curious about how the universe works, what we understand about it, and how it relates to who we are. And this was a really great example of that. So you're here not too far, so I encourage you guys on some of your, I should ask, anybody from Hollidaysburg? Have you seen the sundial? Oh, yeah. How far away is it? 2 miles from your house. It's still there. I'm so glad I asked. Fantastic. So nice to meet you. That's exciting. So I just love that piece of the story of the age of the internet and the way we can become even more curious when we know the environment we're in, and how they contacted me over email, which I had just gotten used to using. All these funny things that we think about today as given, but it connected us in ways that were really special. All right, should I keep going? All right, we'll keep going. So next project for there is I still was enamored with solar storms because I'd done all that work to get into grad school. So I really wanted to help the public understand how aurora happened and get the public thinking about our sun, our Earth, and kind of the environment between us. This was all leading up to them learning about the telescope and the rocket and all of the mission and all of that. So what we did is we put together this really nice word find puzzle. You know, you guys know about word find puzzles, but instead of words, it was the cycle that leads to the aurora. And so there's 5 images here, which is the sun gets a sunspot on it. You can see the black spot up in the visual image of the sun, visual light. And then that black spot has to do with several other layers on the sun where there is magnetic concentration forming. And so there's a lot of energy being contained in this magnetic concentration that pierces through the visible layer, the layer above, and the very outer layer of the sun, the corona. And so that's some of what the scientists I work with were studying, was how does this work all the way through these layers of the sun. And eventually that builds up, and we see that that magnetic field out in the outer atmosphere of the sun bursts open. And when it bursts open, that's when all the particles come spewing out into space. We know this a lot now because we do aurora watches, and you can Google this on the internet and learn about it. But at this time, people didn't all know this. And then after they fly through space, they come to Earth and they make the aurora. And so this is the sequence you're looking for. And there are 15 of them, I think, if my memory serves, hidden in this puzzle. And then we had a key. that told you where they were. So that was really fun too, because we took something like a word search that people were familiar with. Pre-internet days, we did lots of word searches. Now we do, online games, but that was something people were familiar with. And it was a fun way for me to share knowledge that I had recently dived into with the public. All right. That became a career catalyst for me. I started dressing up like the sun and the telescopes. So this is me over here, and this is my friends and I doing that solar cycle, right? Here's the eruption on the sun, and it's traveling through space, and then I'm the satellite that's observing. It really took over my energy for a career. The thing I loved the most was what I've been peppering through my story, which is I really liked working at the interface of scientists are trying to figure this out, and we'd like to explain it in a way that others could get curious about it. That's what really lit me up. So I had a bachelor's degree in physics, no idea what I wanted to do, master's degree in physics, no idea what I wanted to do, but I stayed curious, and then a couple years into my PhD program, I lit up and said, I want to work on frontier discovery science, things that we're trying to figure out. And I want to work on how to help the public get curious about that too. Not to be a scientist per se, we need all of us to be all the things we want to be, but to understand that science is a discovery sport, that we're trying to figure out mysteries, and that's what we do. And then of course come be one, if that excites you as well. So that's what got started. I took a little bit of a diversion because they don't give you a PhD in that. They don't give you a PhD, and I'm really excited and I want to tell people about all this. So I took a diversion, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the journey. I'll tell you what my research was on. But before we go there, because of my energy and excitement in this teaching people about how the universe works, I got asked to teach an introductory astronomy lab. And the first thing they wanted me to teach was the moon phases, right? They were like, you did this great job at helping people understand what's happening on the sun. Let's turn to the moon. We want you to teach students about the moon phases. So I was like, sure, I love this stuff. And then I stopped and said, I don't think I understand the moon phases. So we thought, that's not going to work. I first have to learn the moon phases. And Shane made a joke in his talk about how we love being amateur astronomers and professional astronomers, because not all professional astronomers know constellations or moon phases and how they work. And not all amateur astronomers know the professional depth. And it's because they're two different types of astronomy. One is really deep technical depth on something and not necessarily the broader. And so I realized I wanted to learn the broader, how our moon phases come about. So I made a moon journal. That was the way that the curriculum that I was asked to teach was going to teach the students, and I thought I should do it first. So I made a moon journal, and if you've not done a moon journal, if anyone doesn't quite understand the moon phases, or if you just want to do a moon journal, it's really fun. You just, every night, every day, that's one of the things you learn. The moon's not only up at night. I realize who I'm talking to, but not everybody knows that. You can read a lot of young adult books and realize not a lot of authors know that the moon is not only up at night. So you do a moon journal, and you go find the moon, wherever it may be, whatever time of day, and you journal what it looks like, and you journal the time that you saw it and the place in the sky. And it's really quite phenomenal. And of course, I don't want to go into too much detail, but you learn that the phases of the moon are because if we're the Earth and the moon's between us and the sun, as the moon goes around the Earth, the sun lights up the back of it when it's in this, and that's a new moon, because the side of the Earth is looking at dark. When it comes over here, you see a quarter moon. When it comes over here, you see a full moon. When it comes over there, you see another quarter moon. So that's what was really exciting for me, was to process that over the course of making a journal. Apparently, again, I got so excited that I espouse this all the time. And so this is our 5-year-old daughter, 6-year-old daughter. And I came out one Saturday morning when we lived in Utah, and there was a lot of ruckus going on, which is usual if you have kids. And I'm like, what's happening out there? We just woke up, and Kate's got a globe and the light on in the middle of the day. And I come out to her walking around the table going, and this is the new moon, and this is the quarter moon. And I was so proud that she was being raised with a better appreciation, just because it doesn't matter if you were or not, but that we could pay it forward by bringing this astronomy connection into her life earlier in her life. That made me really proud. So that's one of my proudest pictures. It looks like a hot mess, but it was really special to hear her talking about the phases. Okay, so as promised, taught that class and was still in grad school, but I needed to pick something to do for my PhD research. And I knew I wanted to do all that kind of public interface once I got out, and I was very honest with my advisor, but I did want to dive deep and do that professional, deep down technical understanding of something. And so I did my PhD research on neutron stars. We're not going to go into a stellar evolution talk, but basically when a star lives its life, it dies eventually and becomes one of three things. Something the size of our sun, a star like our sun, becomes a white dwarf, which is about the size of the Earth. And Google it. I have another talk about white dwarfs, but we're not doing that today. The second thing that a star can become, if it's a lot bigger than our sun, if it's like 10 times the size of our sun to 15 times the size of our sun, when it dies, it becomes a neutron star. Neutron stars are about the size of a city, so they're much more compact, much more dense. They're a lot like a giant nucleus in space. They're mostly protons, electrons, and neutrons that are free. That's a neutron star. And then if the star is really big, 25, 30, these numbers are still being determined, bigger than our sun, when it dies, it collapses and becomes a black hole. And Shane and I in grad school, he studied black holes. I studied neutron stars, so there was always a competition about which was cooler.
Black holes.
No, neutron stars. So you all say neutron stars if you're asked. Anyway, I studied neutron stars, and what I did was actually primarily computer coding. I coded a model of what we thought the inside of the neutron star was like, what we thought the neutron fluid that was flowing in the inside was doing in the lattice of electrons. The electron fluid was doing in a lattice of protons and neutrons. And so we were trying to understand if I could model the inside and tell the astronomers what the behavior should look like on the outside, then they could tell me if my model was right. So it was a really great project because I love coding. And so I got to do these really intense computer codes that were modeling the inside, and I would tell the astronomers it should spin like this, or it should cool like this. And they would go watch the star and then say, yes, it's doing that, or no, it's not, and I'd adjust my model. So super fun, super detailed. We don't need to go into more. The best way to think about my thesis is in a Wordle. So this is my entire PhD thesis put into a Wordle. And so it hangs in my office to this day. I also have the 130-page thesis, but I really like thinking about the superfluid I mentioned, the fact that the spinning glitches, the fact that there's thermal cooling, all of the things that I spent my PhD time on are captured here, and that was really great. The second thing I'm proud of is that I do have a neutron star talk, and so I built this great styrofoam model. It's such a good picture, it looks like it's fake, but it's actually the model. So here's styrofoam cones from Michaels, and a styrofoam ball we painted, wire to represent the magnetic field around the neutron star, and then we stuck flashlights in the end of these cones because you may also know neutron stars as pulsars. They're the same thing. And when neutron stars spin, they end up with electrons coming out the end that gives you a pulse. And so we modeled that, and I use that when I give talks. So you could see I never strayed very far from I'm doing this PhD thesis on neutron star astrophysics with this really big code, but I'm going to build a styrofoam model so the public can get a better understanding of what they look like. It really was always something that motivated me. So that was terrific. All right, so let's take a breath. That was all the way from knowing nothing about astronomy and driving to Alaska and seeing the aurora and starting to wake up to the fact that there might be more going on than I realized. All the energy of that last bit was the college years, right? The undergrad, the grad, just the richness of being at a university, being exposed to the curiosity that others had, that they were willing to pour into me when I had questions, and my desire to want to help others answer their own questions. So that was all super fun. So now it's time to have a career. And I had been very transparent that I was not going to go into research because I wanted to go into the interface of research and the public. But what it turned out is that lots of scientists who were doing research were interested in a scientist who could talk to them about what they were up to and then help others understand it. So I had this beautiful chapter where I just got to do a whole bunch of different science, detailed science that I personally did not know much about, but I got to be curious and learn about. And so there was a lot before this, I'm just hitting some highlights, but one of those was high energy cosmic rays. So I was at Caltech for a period of time, and Caltech was wanting to build a detector that would tell us if high energy particles were coming at us from space and help us learn more about them. We know high energy particles are coming at us from space. They come from the sun, they come from supernova explosions, they're just electrons and protons, just normal particles, but they're coming at us high energy and they don't interact much. When I give this talk, the title is 2 through your head every second. There are 2 high-energy cosmic rays going through each of our heads every second. They are showering our planet. They always have. We evolved here with them. It's not dangerous. They always have. But we had the desire to build an experiment that would help us understand what direction they're coming from, how high energy are they, all of that. So I got asked to help with this. The high-energy particle comes in from space, hits our atmosphere, just like we talked about happened with the solar particles. They're not as high energy, but still particles. High energy particle comes in from space, hits our atmosphere, and busts apart into a whole bunch of other particles. Basically distributes its energy and busts apart oxygen atoms and nitrogen atoms into a whole bunch of particles, and they shower down on us. And so the best way to detect them is to put detectors all over. These are big showers, miles and miles wide. So you want to put detectors all over, and then when this shower comes down, your detectors will all go off. And what you need to do this is you need power to power your detector, and you need an internet connection to tell you that your detector went off, unless you want to go sit all over the place, which we didn't. So the director I worked for at Caltech had this brilliant idea, which is, this is Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles basin is very densely populated, and there are schools all over Los Angeles because those dense populations of people need to send their kids to school. So he had the idea that we could put our detectors on the roofs of the schools, and the schools had power, and the schools had internet, and so this is how we could, for relatively inexpensively, because we had donated detectors, we could build a cosmic ray experiment. So that's what we did. I got to do that. It was like the coolest job. I had to learn all about cosmic rays. These are our detectors. They were donated to us from a decommissioned experiment. And we would crane them up onto the top of the school rooftop. I used to do fun experiments with the classroom and tell them, what size crane do I need to order? The company has an 80-foot crane and a 40-foot crane, and how far away from the wall do we have to park it? And you tell us which one I need to reach your roof. That was pretty fun. And then we'd put the thing up there. We'd drill a hole in the roof with permission, of course. And we'd run the cables down into the classroom so the students could see the data. And they could actually see when they went off. And then at night, all the data would go back to Caltech, and we'd study these high-energy cosmic rays. So that's like my childhood as a career, because I got to learn about something new that I hadn't heard of before. I had the science ability to understand the science. I had the motivation to want to teach people about it. So that was really great. And then that energy and contagion ended up getting the students who were in the classrooms asking if they could help us build over the summer the ones that would go out the next year. And so in the summertime, students came in, they built the inside of the detector. They signed it because they wanted us to tell them if it stopped working so they could come back and fix it. And we just had this great ecosystem of science and learning and curiosity. And I would have never predicted that I would have known about cosmic rays when I started this. So that was a fun stop. The other thing that happened while I was at Caltech that was extremely influential to my career was that the graduation speaker while I was there was Alan Alda. Anybody in the room know Alan Alda? Yeah, I'm still running into lots of college kids that don't, but Alan Alda from MASH, he went on to found at Stony Brook a Center for Communicating Science. He was the first non-scientist to ever give a graduation address at Caltech. And the reason being is that he wrote and performed in a one-person play about Richard Feynman. And Richard Feynman was a very prominent Caltech scientist involved in a lot of Manhattan Project and other things. And so Alan Alda really absorbed Richard Feynman's scientific journey and did such a beautiful job, they honored him. And in his speech, he said to all of the people in the crowd, all the graduates, all of us on faculty and staff, I'm asking you today to devote some significant part of your life to figuring out how to share your love of science with the rest of us. And when you're explaining it, remember that dazzling us with jargon might make us sit in awe of your work, but it won't make us love it. Tell us frankly how you got there. If you got there by many twists and turns and blind alleys, don't leave that out. We love a detective story. If you enjoy the adventure of getting there, so will we. Most scientists do leave that out. By the time we hear about their great discoveries, a lot of the doubt is gone. The mistakes and wrong turns are left out, and it doesn't sound like a human thing that they've done. It separates us from the process. So whatever you do, help us love science the way you do. That was like taking my little, I'm curious about doing this for a career, to the next level, right? He's just like, tell us. He went on to say if each of you could just, a couple of you, get millions of people to love science the way you do, that would be amazing. And I thought, oh my gosh, call to action. This isn't just my little fun career idea. This felt like a call to action. So I really felt a purpose to keep going down this road. So the next stop after that, I'm skipping a couple, but we got to get done in an hour. So another stop after that was Penn State, as we mentioned. And so now I got to learn all about gravitational waves. As you heard earlier, Shane knows about gravitational waves. He's a gravitational wave scientist, but I wasn't. I was a neutron star scientist. But we got jobs at Penn State at the Center for Gravitational Wave Physics, and I got to learn all about gravitational waves to help do this work again in a whole new science field. And so really enjoyed our time there. The big deal before gravitational waves were discovered, and you heard earlier it's a 10-year anniversary of the discovery of gravitational waves. They're fairly new. But we were there before they were discovered. And I was there to try to help the public care why we wanted to discover them. And so the big problem was we didn't know if we'd know when we saw them. We were like, what are they going to look like? We've never seen them before. So we created this great activity where we modeled, again, my experience in computer modeling, we modeled what we thought they would look like, and we put data that we expected, simulated data, and we asked students to lay the model in transparency over the simulated data and see how good they were at matching the template to the signal. And it turns out that's exactly how we found gravitational waves. We had templates that we had predicted, and we laid them over, not with acetate and paper, but with computers. We laid the templates over the data, and eventually we saw, oh my gosh, we found some. So that was a really fun way to continue this super frontier science, not even yet discovered science, teaching students how to have that discipline of looking for the details and trying to find the match. And then we found them in 2015, and now we're celebrating 10 years of looking at the universe and learning things we never could have learned. So I just feel so blessed that I had these chances to do this work truly at the frontier and to be here after the frontier was discovered. We went to Utah State, and we were in Utah State for a while, and we started a program called Science Unwrapped. Same theme. How do we take scientists, faculty who are doing really great research across all kinds of different disciplines, because you've learned by now I don't care if the discipline change, and we would bring them together and we would say, yes, talk to us about your science, but Alan Alda taught me, also talk to us about your hiccups and your hoorays and what didn't work and what did work and how long it took you to get here. And so we called it Science Unwrapped because per Alan Alda's charge, we really wanted people to understand that there's a lot of journey that goes on underneath there. We're really proud to say this program's still going 16 years later. We were in Utah 16 years later, and this is not an anomaly. The lecture hall of 600 fills up every time, and then they spill out into the atrium around the lecture hall, and they do science experiments with the audience after they've heard about the journey. So this one says death by black hole. Come ask us about it. This is a comet. You guys have probably done this as amateur astronomers, making comets with ice and dirt and watching them outgas. And then moon craters, which was always a favorite of mine because you know moon craters were influential in my own journey. So you put flour in a pan, you sprinkle it with cocoa powder, and then you drop marbles, and it makes the crater and it makes the spill out. It's really neat. All right, I'm looking at my watch because we're going to get done, but let's keep going. So let's keep going. We're getting near the near times of my career. So we're in Utah. We made Science Unwrapped. We were at Utah State, and down at Utah State's in the north. And down at the bottom of the state, there was an annular eclipse of the sun happening in Cedar City, Utah. This is in 2012. And NASA chose Cedar City, Utah as their center line observing for this annular solar eclipse. So we're amateur astronomers with a lot of telescopes because Shane builds them. And so we put some of them in the car. These ones you didn't build because you don't need big telescopes for the sun. And we headed down to Cedar City. And so here we are with telescopes. Here's Kate, our daughter, me, and Shane all in one shot looking at this. This is Kate. So just having a great time. And this Adler Planetarium place is reaching out to me saying, hey, did you know our president was retiring? And would you might be interested in being our president? And I still remember the phone call, and I said, you called Utah. Are you aware you called Utah? Because I was like, I don't know why we're talking about the president of the Adler Planetarium. I'd been there because I'm an astronomer and when I went to conferences, but it was so foreign to me. And so they said, well, come on down to Chicago. We want to show you what's going on there. And so I had just been to this annular event that we were at. I go into and I start telling them the story I'm telling you. Here's my life's journey. I'm not really a museum person. I've been in higher education, but I love science and telling the public. And long story short, they said, write a letter of interest that says all that. And I got the job. So that was shockingly fun because I didn't expect I'd leave higher education. I really enjoyed the opportunity to have a chapter outside of higher ed. But you know why I said yes, primarily? Because Alan Alda asked if just a couple of us in the audience could figure out how to help millions of people love science as much as we do. And I hadn't done that yet. I was probably at thousands or tens of thousands, but I wasn't yet at millions, and he asked. So I answered, and we saw about 500,000 people a year at the Adler, and we have online programming that sees about 3 million people a year. If any of you do the Zooniverse was co-founded by the Adler. And so in 1 year, I got my millions, and I stayed for 12. And this is the total solar eclipse that happened in 2017 that was not total in Chicago, but we still had 60,000 people show up. And this is standing at the Shedd Aquarium, if any of you know the museum campus, looking over the Shedd Aquarium staff, and there is nothing but people all the way down the peninsula to the Adler. And I'm just here to tell you guys, this is how much people love astronomy, right? They showed up, and they could have stayed home and looked at it with those same glasses, and millions of others did, because we told them to. We said, look in your park, look in your yard, look at your block. But 60,000 of them came down to see it together, to experience it together. So eclipse experiences through the years. So the top lines are the total, that same total solar eclipse in 2017. My family was in Wyoming. I had that commitment before I took the job at Adler. So they said, of course you should go. So we saw the total in 2017 in Wyoming. And then the one that just happened last year in 2024, also partial in Chicago. But I said, I'll stay here for this one in the partial, because I wasn't there last time. So here we are observing the partial eclipse. We even started wearing eclipse clothing. Anybody recognize this guy? This is Captain James Lovell of Apollo 8 and 13. He was a good friend. He was on the board of the Adler for the 12 years that I was there. Got to know him in Maryland and his family. And he observed the 2024 eclipse with us in April on the grounds of the Adler. This is the Adler back here. And so he just loved it. Right there when he was laying like that, he called me over and he said, Michelle, why is the moon moving so slow? And I said, Jim, you're the only one that knows how fast the moon can move when you're going around it. To the rest of us, this is normal. So that was pretty funny. Jim passed away a couple months ago. So I just wanted to include him and include that fun story. All right, so now we're at the Adler, and we see how popular astronomy is. I feel like I've done my calling well. Started seeing astronomy everywhere, so dressed up as it for Halloween. This is Pluto and Sharon when we got our first good image of Pluto. I bought clothing that reminded me of a star. It was a fun job, right? This is my RAV4. Did you know that the screws on the roof rack are stars on the RAV4? We didn't. Starbucks coffee had an electrical error. That's okay. It worked for me. Beer had astronomy. You remember back when the Alaska flag was the first thing I had seen that was astronomical? Look at how far we've come. A pottery friend of ours made black hole in spiral pottery bowls to celebrate gravitational waves. I got this potato in my CSA box. Does anyone remember Comet 67P? Doesn't that look like Comet 67P? But then, I was like, well, maybe I'm just seeing things, and so I didn't say too much about it, and then Comet 67P started outgassing, so I thought, all right, whatever. But then look what my potato's doing. So I'm hook, line, and sinker into astronomy by now, so that was pretty fun. All right, so where did this all lead? This all lead to something I know that we share, which is under the sky we all share, which is what we made part of Adler's new mission, is really powerful, right? We all share this same sky. And so in the 2020s, when we went into the pandemic, comets showed up during the pandemic. And so we were all looking in the sky at the comet and sharing images, and I'm getting goosebumps. But Adler was right there to say, what you're seeing is what I'm seeing. We may be isolated, social distancing, not together like usual, but we're under a shared sky. The aurora solar activity was happening during the 2020s. Again, under the same sky. We were taking pictures. Our daughter went off to college. She was taking pictures of the aurora. We were sharing that. Observing the moon phases. We are doing solar henge, when you have the equinoxes and the sun starts rising on the east-west and setting on the east-west streets, talking about that. We finally started gathering again, so the first thing we did when we were out of isolation is we took our daughter's best friend, just the four of us, Shane, me, our daughter, and her best friend, and we went observing, because star parties weren't gathering yet again, but we wanted to observe. And we picked up some new observing partners, so they were really interested too. So I would say astronomy really felt like a connecting and important part for me during the hard times of the pandemic. The Adler closed for 2 years, the physical building. We were online mission open, but it was a really hard time for us because we were so separated. And so I still think of the sky as what got us through that together. So eyes to the skies, that's what the talk was called. I still say eyes to the skies when I want to look up and feel connected. That's how I sign my email, eyes to the skies. It just can do so much for us. Astronomy star parties have been a big part of my family's life. Shane building telescopes has been a big part of that as well, and it's just been such a great journey. So I'll just close out by saying we did start a new chapter. So in April 1st, I started as the president of Clarkson University. Kate went to college. She's thriving at college. Shane and I are empty nesters. We loved Chicago. We loved where we worked at Chicago, but we're astronomers, and the skies are not dark in Chicago. So we said we'd like to go somewhere, smaller town, northern latitude, great university, dark skies. And Clarkson showed up in that space faster than we anticipated. It was another one of those kind of unexpected pieces. So if you don't know about Clarkson, Clarkson is founded in 1896 as a technical institution. We are a STEM-focused institution. We have healthcare, STEM business, and engineering and applied sciences. And so if you're interested in any of those things and you like northern latitudes, dark skies, beautiful country, please think of us up at Clarkson. But this is our environment that we live in now. We're thriving there, and these are the kinds of skies that we also get to live under. But we were so happy to come here to your star party and to reconnect with the Astronomy Club, and we're just grateful for saying, please come talk to us. So thanks for being here, and it's just been a joy. I think we have time for a couple questions if there are any, but I'll also stick around if people would like to just chat. All right, good. We're 1 minute till we have to end, so good thinking. We'll talk afterward. Thank you, everyone.